The silent orphan knocked twice before saying, "Mama said you're my real father, and you owe me." The sound came soft as a whisper, but it cut through Jake Morrow's dreams like a blade through silk. 2 knocks. Nothing more. Nothing less. He'd been dreaming of Sarah again, her laugh like water over stones, her hair catching sunlight the way wheat catches wind. 7 years, and still she visited him in sleep, bringing with her the taste of regret and the weight of choices that could never be undone. Jake's eyes opened to the gray light that comes before dawn. His hand moved without thought to the Colt point .45 resting on the wooden crate beside his bed. Old habits die hard in men who've lived by the gun. The cabin held its breath around him. 4 walls of pine and silence that had sheltered him through 3 bitter winters in this forgotten corner of Colorado territory. Here, where the mountains met the plains and civilization was just a word men used in saloons, Jake had built himself a life measured in solitude and morning coffee. The knocks came again. 2 soft taps, patient as rain. Jake swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his bare feet finding the cold floor. His joints protested. 42 years of hard living had left their mark in his bones. He pulled on his pants and shirt, moving quiet as a man who'd learned that noise could mean death. Through the single window, the world outside was painted in shades of silver and shadow. No horses, no raiders, just the endless stretch of grassland rolling toward the horizon like a brown ocean under the pale sky. He approached the door the way he approached everything, careful, ready. The gun felt familiar in his palm, an old friend that had never let him down. Behind the door could be anything. Bounty hunters who'd finally tracked him down. Men seeking revenge for sins committed in towns whose names he'd tried to forget. Or maybe just a drifter looking for coffee and conversation. Jake turned the handle and pulled the door open. What he found was a child. She stood on his doorstep like a ghost made flesh, small and thin and covered in the kind of dust that comes from walking long roads under an unforgiving sun. 9 years old, maybe 10, though hunger had a way of making children look smaller than they were. Her dress had once been blue, but was now the color of prairie dirt. Her hair hung in tangles around a face that was all sharp angles and serious eyes. Eyes the color of winter sky. Eyes that looked familiar in a way that made his chest tight. "You Jake Morrow?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the exhaustion underneath, like a song played on worn-out strings. "Might be." He kept the gun low, but ready. "Who's asking?" The girl reached into a pocket of her dress and pulled out a piece of paper, folded and refolded until it was soft as cloth. The paper was stained with sweat and tears and time. "My mama said I should give this to you. Said you'd know what it means." Jake looked at the letter, but didn't reach for it. Not yet. Something cold was spreading through his chest, a feeling like winter arriving early. "What's your name, child?" "Lily." She held the paper toward him like an offering. "Lily Mae Patterson, though I reckon that might not be my real name, depending on what that letter says." The name hit him like a fist to the gut. Patterson, Sarah's married name. The name she'd taken when she wed that shopkeeper from Denver, trying to build a respectable life from the ashes of what she'd shared with Jake during those stolen weeks in the mountains. He'd heard she'd married well, found safety in a man who sold dry goods and didn't wear his sins on his gun belt. Jake's hand trembled as he took the letter. The paper felt heavy, weighted with words he wasn't ready to read. He unfolded it slow, each crease revealing more of Sarah's careful handwriting. The ink had faded to brown, but the words were clear enough. "Jake, if Lily is bringing you this letter, then I am dead and she has nowhere else to go. You will see it in her eyes. She has your stubborn chin and my restless heart, but those eyes are yours. She was born 8 months after you left the mountains. I named her father as my husband, but we both know the truth. I tried to give her a good life, a safe life. But the fever took me, and Thomas died 2 years past from his weak heart. There's no money left, no family who want a child that isn't blood. The town means to send her to an orphanage in Kansas City, but I remembered how you once said every child deserves better than what the world usually gives them. She doesn't know yet. I told her you were a friend who might help. The choice is yours, Jake. You never wanted to be tied down, and I won't judge you if you send her away. But if there's any tenderness left in that guarded heart of yours, she is your daughter, and she needs you. I'm sorry for never telling you. I'm sorry for a lot of things." Sarah, the words swam before his eyes. Jake read the letter twice, then a third time, as if the words might change if he looked at them long enough. His daughter, this dust-covered, serious-eyed child, was his blood, his legacy, walking on small legs across impossible miles to find him. He looked up at Lily, really looked at her this time. Now that he knew what to see, he couldn't unsee it. The stubborn set of her jaw when she was thinking hard. The way she held herself straight despite her exhaustion, proud even in her raggedness. And those eyes, God help him, those were his own eyes looking back at him from a face that carried Sarah's delicate bones. "Your mama," he said, his voice rough as sand. "When did she?" 3 weeks passed. Lily's chin lifted, but he could see the tears she was fighting. The fever came fast. She was talking strange at the end, saying things about mountains and a man who made her laugh. She kept saying your name. Jake folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his shirt pocket. The morning was growing lighter, painting the grassland in shades of gold and green. Somewhere in the distance, a meadow lark called to its mate, a sound pure and lonely as heartbreak. "You hungry?" he asked. Lily nodded. "Come inside then. We'll figure this out over coffee and whatever food I can manage." She followed him into the cabin, her small presence changing everything just by being there. The silence that had been his companion for so long suddenly felt different. Not peaceful, but hollow, waiting to be filled with something he'd forgotten how to give. Jake watched her take in his sparse home. The single room with its bed, table, chair, and stone fireplace. No pictures on the walls. No souvenirs anywhere. It was a place built for a man who expected nothing from life but solitude and the daily choice to keep breathing. Now, there was a child in his space, and she was looking at him with eyes that held questions he didn't know how to answer and needs he'd spent 7 years learning to ignore. As he moved to light the fire and start the coffee, Jake felt the weight of everything he'd been running from settling on his shoulders like dust after a long ride. The coffee was bitter, but Lily drank it without complaint. She sat at Jake's small wooden table, her feet not quite touching the floor, holding the tin cup in both hands like it was something precious. Steam rose between them, creating small ghosts in the morning air. Jake watched her from across the table, this child who carried his blood and Sarah's grace, and felt something shift inside his chest, a breaking and a healing all at once. "Tell me about her," he said quietly. "About Sarah, about how she died." Lily set down the cup and stared into the dark liquid. Her small fingers traced circles on the worn wood of the table. The fever came in summer, hot as blazes it was, and Mama kept getting colder. She'd wrap herself in blankets and still shake like autumn leaves. The doctor said it was her lungs, said they were filling up with water. Jake's hands tightened around his own cup. He remembered Sarah's laugh, bright and clear as mountain water. The thought of that sound being silenced by sickness made his throat close up. "She talked about you near the end," Lily continued, her voice steady but soft. "Said you had gentle hands despite the gun you carried. Said you carved her a wooden bird once, small enough to fit in her palm. She still had it when she died. A wooden bird." Jake remembered that night by the campfire, how Sarah had watched him whittle away the evening hours, turning a piece of pine into something that might fly if it were real. She'd kept it all these years through marriage and motherhood and all the ordinary days that had led to this moment. She was a good woman, he said, and the words felt small for such a large loss. I should have, he stopped himself. Should have what? Stayed when he knew his presence would only bring danger? Fought men who would have killed them both for the bounty on his head? There were no right answers in a life like his, only choices that left scars. Lily looked up at him with those winter sky eyes. She said you had your reasons for leaving. Said some men carry too much darkness to stay in the light. The truth of it hit him like a fist. He'd been running from his own shadow for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to stand still. But now there was this child, this piece of Sarah that lived and breathed and needed things he didn't know how to give. Jake stood and moved to the window. Outside, the morning sun was painting the grass gold, but he could see dust rising in the distance. Riders, moving slow and steady toward his cabin. His gut tightened. In his line of work, unexpected visitors usually meant trouble. "You said you walked here," he said, still watching the approaching dust cloud. "How far?" "Near 2 weeks from Denver. Caught rides when I could. Walked when I couldn't." Lily's voice carried a quiet pride. "Mama taught me to read the stars, find water, make camp. Said a woman needs to know how to take care of herself in this world." 2 weeks alone on the roads. Jake felt a mixture of admiration and horror at what this child had endured. At 9 years old, she'd shown more courage than most grown men he'd known. But courage wouldn't stop a bullet or turn a hard heart soft. The riders were closer now. 3 of them, moving with the careful pace of men who weren't in a hurry because they knew their quarry had nowhere to run. Jake recognized the rhythm. It was the same way he'd once approached his own targets, confident and patient as death itself. "Lily," he said, not turning from the window, "I need you to listen to me careful. There might be trouble coming. If I tell you to hide, you hide. If I tell you to run, you run and don't look back. You understand?" She nodded, but he caught the fear that flickered across her face. It was the look of a child who'd seen too much already, who knew that the world was full of wolves dressed as men. Jake strapped on his gun belt, the leather worn smooth by years of use. The weight of the Colt felt heavier today, like it was pulling him down instead of holding him up. He'd killed 12 men with that gun, maybe 13 if you counted the one who died slow from blood loss 3 days after their fight. Each name was carved into his memory like words on a tombstone. But now there was Lily to think about. This small girl who carried his blood and Sarah's hope, who'd walked across half of Colorado to find a father she'd never known. The thought of her seeing him kill, of those winter sky eyes witnessing the violence he was capable of, made his stomach turn. The riders pulled up outside his cabin. Through the window, Jake could see them clearly now, 3 hard men with the look of bounty hunters. The leader wore a black hat and had a scar running from his left ear to his jaw. His companions sat their horses like men who'd spent their lives in the saddle, hunting other men for coin. "Jake Morrow," the scarred man called out. "We know you're in there. Come on out peaceful-like, and we won't have to make this hard." Jake looked at Lily, who'd gone pale as morning frost. She was trying to be brave, but her hands were shaking. He wanted to tell her it would be all right, that he'd protect her no matter what. But promises were dangerous things, and he'd learned long ago not to make ones he couldn't keep. "There's a root cellar," he said quietly, nodding toward a trapdoor near the fireplace. "Hidden under that rug. You get down there and stay quiet no matter what you hear." Lily shook her head. "I don't want to leave you." The words hit him harder than any bullet ever had. This child, who barely knew him, was more worried about his safety than her own. It was Sarah all over again, that fierce loyalty that made a person risk everything for love. "Morrow." The voice outside was getting impatient. "Time's wasting. Come out, or we're coming in." Jake knelt down beside Lily, his weathered hands gentle on her small shoulders. "I've been taking care of myself for a long time. But I can't do that and worry about you too. Please, Lily, go hide." She looked at him for a long moment, those eyes searching his face like she was memorizing it. Then she nodded and moved toward the trapdoor. As she lifted the rug, she turned back to him. "You come back to me," she said, and it wasn't a request. It was a command given with all the authority of a daughter to her father. Jake watched her disappear into the darkness below, then replaced the rug over the trapdoor. The cabin felt empty without her, like all the warmth had been sucked out of the air. He checked his gun one more time, feeling the familiar weight of it in his palm. Outside, leather creaked as the men dismounted. Boot heels rang against the hard-packed earth. Jake had been in this situation a dozen times before, but it had never mattered so much whether he lived or died. Now, there was someone counting on him, someone who needed him to be more than just fast with a gun. He thought about Sarah's letter, about the daughter she'd hidden from him for 9 years, about the wooden bird that had survived when so much else had been lost. Maybe it was time to stop running from the man he used to be and start fighting for the man he could become. The first knock on the door came hard and demanding, nothing like Lily's gentle tapping. Jake drew his gun and moved toward the sound, carrying with him the weight of all his sins and the hope of something better. Jake opened the door slow, his gun drawn but held low. The three men stood in a half circle, their horses stamping and snorting behind them. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty ground, making everything look like a painting done in shades of gold and brown. The scarred man stepped forward, his hand resting easy on his gun belt. "Jake Morrow, been looking for you a long time. Have you now?" Jake kept his voice level, but his eyes were taking in details, the way the man on the left favored his right leg, probably an old wound. The nervous twitch in the youngest one's jaw. The confident stance of their leader, a man who'd killed before and expected to kill again. "Name's Garrett. Maybe you remember me from Abilene. You put a bullet in my shoulder and left me for dead." The scar seemed to pull at Garrett's mouth when he smiled. "Took me 2 years to heal proper. Another 3 to track you down." Jake did remember. Abilene, 5 years past. A job gone wrong. A shootout in a saloon that left 2 men dead and Garrett bleeding in the sawdust. Jake had thought him finished then, but wounded men sometimes lived longer than dead ones. "That was business," Jake said. "This doesn't have to be personal." "Oh, but it is." Garrett's smile widened. "See, there's $1,000 on your head. Dead or alive. Though dead pays the same and causes less trouble. But it stopped being just about money the day you put lead in me." From inside the cabin came a small sound. Nothing more than a board creaking, but Jake's heart clenched. Lily was supposed to be in the root cellar, but children were curious creatures, and curious creatures got themselves killed in situations like this. "I've got no quarrel with you boys," Jake said, taking a half step to his left, trying to draw their attention away from the cabin. "We can settle this just between us." "Afraid not." The youngest bounty hunter spoke for the first time, his voice high and eager. "Word is you've gone soft, living alone out here like some hermit. Makes a man wonder what you're hiding." Jake's blood ran cold. If they searched the cabin, if they found Lily, "Nothing to hide," he said. "Just a man trying to live quiet." Garrett laughed, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "Jake Morrow, living quiet. That's rich. You killed more men than cholera in some towns. Now you expect us to believe you found religion." The conversation was moving the wrong direction. Jake could feel it slipping away from him like water through his fingers. In the old days, he would have drawn already, trusted his speed and his aim to see him through. But those days felt like a lifetime ago, and now there was Lily to think about. "Let's finish this," he said, and his hand moved toward his gun. But instead of metal clearing leather, what stopped them all was the sound of a door opening behind him. Jake's heart nearly stopped as small footsteps crossed the cabin floor. "Papa!" The word hung in the air like smoke. Jake closed his eyes for just a moment, knowing that everything had changed. When he opened them again, Garrett was grinning like a man who'd just found gold in his pocket. Well, Garrett said. "Papa, is it? Seems you do have something to hide after all." Jake turned to see Lily standing in the doorway, her small face pale but determined. She wasn't supposed to be there. She was supposed to be safe in the darkness below ground. But here she was, and there was no taking it back. "Go inside, Lily," he said quietly. She shook her head. "I heard the voices. I got scared." Garrett stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the child. "Pretty little thing. Yours, Jake? Or just some stray you picked up? Leave her out of this." Jake's voice carried a warning sharp as a blade. "Can't do that. See, a man with a child has something to lose. Changes the whole game." Garrett's hand moved to his gun. "Tell you what, you toss that iron of yours in the dirt, and maybe we let the girl live." "Maybe." Jake looked at Lily, standing there in her worn blue dress, trying so hard to be brave. He thought about Sarah's letter, about the wooden bird she'd kept all these years, about the choice between the man he'd been and the man he could become. His gun was still in his hand. He could draw and fire, probably take one of them, maybe 2, but probably wasn't good enough when his daughter's life hung in the balance. Slowly, Jake set his Colt on the ground and kicked it away. "Smart man," Garrett said. He drew his own weapon, the barrel catching sunlight like a promise of death. "Now step away from the door." Jake moved sideways, keeping himself between the gunman and Lily. His mind was working fast, looking for angles, for chances, for any way out that didn't end with her blood in the dust. You know, Garrett said conversationally, killing you quick would be a mercy. But I'm thinking slow might be better. Let you watch what happens to little girls when there's no one left to protect them. The words hit Jake like physical blows. He'd known evil men in his time, but this was something deeper and darker. This was the kind of cruelty that fed on innocence. Please, Jake said, and he didn't care how it sounded. She's just a child. So it was my sister when your kind rode through our town. Garrett's face hardened. You killers never think about the families left behind, do you? Jake felt the weight of all his sins settling on his shoulders. Every man he'd killed, every life he'd taken, they all had people who mourned them, people who carried the pain forward like a wound that never healed. But Lily didn't deserve to pay for his choices. Take me, he said. Let her go and take me. The bounty's on my head, not hers. Garrett seemed to consider this, tilting his head like a dog listening to a distant sound. Tempting, but I think I'll take my time with both of you. That's when Lily stepped forward. Wait, she said, her young voice cutting through the tension like a bell. Before you do anything, can I ask something? Garrett looked amused. What's that, little one? My papa was teaching me to whittle, to carve like my mama used to tell me about. Can you show me one more time? Before whatever happens. Jake stared at her, not understanding. But something in her eyes, some quick intelligence, made him pay attention. Whittling. Garrett laughed. That's what you want? A carving lesson? Lily nodded solemnly. Mama said he made her a bird once. I never learned how. It would mean a lot. There was something in her voice, some note that Jake recognized. She was up to something, this daughter of his. Playing for time, or creating a distraction. He couldn't tell which, but he was willing to follow her lead. Let me get my knife, Jake said carefully. Slowly, Garrett warned, but he seemed genuinely entertained by the request. Probably thought it was the sweetness of an innocent child, not knowing that children who walked alone across dangerous country learned to think like survivors. Jake reached into his boot and pulled out a small folding knife, the kind every man carried for a dozen daily tasks. He also picked up a piece of wood from the pile beside the door, kindling he'd cut for the fire. Show me about the bird, Lily said, moving closer to him, as Jake began to work the knife against the wood, shaving away thin curls of pine. He felt Lily press something into his left hand, something small and hard and warm from her pocket. When he glanced down, he saw it, a piece of flint and a bit of steel, fire-making tools that Sarah must have taught her to carry. Understanding flooded through him. The woodpile, the cabin's dry timbers, the way the morning wind was blowing toward the men and their horses. The bird needs to be just right, Lily said loudly, her voice covering the soft scratch of flint against steel behind the wood in Jake's hands. Mama said you made it perfect. Smoke began to rise from the kindling in Jake's left hand, hidden behind the larger piece he was carving. The men were watching the show, amused by what they took for a child's last wish and a father's desperate attempt to grant it. Fire, Jake shouted, tossing the burning kindling into the larger wood pile. The dry timber caught instantly, flames leaping high and wild, filling the air with smoke and sparks. The horses reared and whinnied in panic. Garrett spun toward the blaze, his gun swinging away from Jake. In that moment, that single heartbeat of distraction, Jake dove for his Colt. His hand closed around the familiar grip just as Garrett turned back, understanding and fury warring on his scarred face. But Jake was already moving, rolling and firing in one smooth motion that came from years of staying alive by being faster than death itself. The first shot took Garrett in the chest, spinning him backward. The second and third caught the other two men before they could clear leather, their bodies dropping into the dust like sacks of grain. When the echoes faded, there was only the crackle of flames and the sound of horses running free across the grassland. Jake stood slowly, his gun still smoking in his hand, and looked at what he'd done. 3 men lay dead in the dirt outside his cabin. The woodpile blazed like a signal fire, sending black smoke into the clear morning sky. And Lily stood watching him with those winter sky eyes, seeing him for what he truly was, a killer who'd just killed again, even if it was to protect her. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice rough with smoke and sorrow. "I'm sorry you had to see that." But Lily just walked over and took his free hand in both of hers. "You came back to me," she said simply, "like you promised." Jake holstered his gun and knelt down beside the burning woodpile, using dirt to smother the flames before they spread to the cabin. As he worked, he felt something shift inside him, not the weight of new sins added to old ones, but something lighter. The knowledge that sometimes killing was about protecting rather than destroying, that violence could serve love instead of feeding on it. When the fire was out, he looked at his daughter, and she was his daughter now in every way that mattered, and saw not fear in her eyes, but understanding. She'd grown up in a hard world, and she knew that good men sometimes had to do terrible things to keep the people they loved safe. "We should bury them," Lily said, looking at the 3 bodies. "Mama always said even bad men deserve to rest in the ground." Jake nodded, thinking of Sarah and her gentle heart, of how she'd somehow passed that kindness on to their daughter despite all the hardness the child had endured. As he went to fetch a shovel, he wondered what other gifts his woman had left behind in this small person who'd knocked twice on his door and changed everything he thought he knew about himself. 6 months passed like pages turning in a book of quiet days. The graves of the 3 bounty hunters had long since settled into the earth, marked only by 3 simple wooden crosses that Jake had carved during the long winter evenings. Lily had insisted on the crosses, saying that even bad men deserved to be remembered as something more than the worst thing they'd ever done. Winter had been hard, but good. Jake taught Lily to split kindling, to read the sky for weather, to make coffee that didn't taste like mud. She taught him to braid hair, to sing songs her mother had loved, to find joy in small things like the first robin's song or fresh biscuits cooling on the windowsill. Together they'd learned the rhythm of a shared life, the comfort of 2 people moving around each other in a small space, the easy silence that comes when words aren't needed. The cabin had changed too. Lily's presence had softened its harsh edges. Wildflowers now grew in a small garden beside the door. Curtains, sewn from an old dress of Sarah's that Lily had carried in her bundle, hung at the windows. A rocking chair sat by the fireplace, built by Jake's careful hands during the long December nights when Lily slept and he whittled away his restlessness. On this particular morning in early April, Jake sat at his table watching Lily tend the fire. She moved with confidence now, no longer the half-starved waif who'd knocked on his door. Good food and steady shelter had filled out her face and put color in her cheeks. But more than that, she carried herself differently, like someone who belonged somewhere, who was wanted and loved. "The eggs are ready," she said, using a cloth to lift the pan from the fire. She'd learned to cook over the winter, guided by memories of watching her mother and Jake's patient instruction. The eggs were a little burned on one side, but Jake ate them like they were the finest meal he'd ever tasted. They were finishing breakfast when the sound of hooves reached them. Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his gun, but he caught himself. Not every rider meant trouble, and he was trying to teach himself, and Lily, that the world held kindness as well as cruelty. Through the window, he saw 2 people approaching on horseback, a man and a woman, both well-dressed in the manner of town folk. The woman sat her horse like someone unused to long rides, her face tight with either discomfort or determination. The man was older, with gray in his beard and the careful posture of someone who made his living with his mind rather than his hands. Jake stepped outside to meet them, Lily close behind him. The morning air was sweet with the promise of spring, carrying the scent of new grass and distant rain. "Mr. Morrow." The older man dismounted carefully, his movements stiff from the saddle. "I'm Judge Patterson. This is my wife, Clara. We've come about the child." Jake's blood went cold. Patterson, Sarah's husband's name. These were Thomas Patterson's brother and sister-in-law, come to claim what they saw as rightfully theirs. "Lily," the woman said, stepping forward with tears already forming in her eyes. "Oh, sweet child, look how you've grown. We've been searching for you since we heard about your mother's death." Lily moved closer to Jake, her small hand finding his. I know who you are, she said quietly. Your Uncle William and Aunt Clara. Mama used to talk about you. The judge, Uncle William, had kind eyes but the bearing of a man accustomed to being obeyed. We come to take you home, child, to give you the life you deserve. A proper home, schooling, everything your mother would have wanted for you. Jake felt something cracking inside his chest. He'd known this day would come eventually, but knowing and being ready were different things entirely. These people were offering Lily everything he couldn't: education, respectability, a future free from the shadows of his past. What kind of life? Jake asked, his voice rough. Clara Patterson's eyes flickered to the gun at his hip, taking in the rough cabin, the simple life they'd built here in the wilderness. A civilized life, Mr. Morrow. We live in St. Louis. William has a fine practice, and I've been wanting a daughter to raise for years. Lily would have music lessons, proper schooling, the chance to become a lady. I'm learning things, Lily said, her voice small but steady. Jake's teaching me to read better and to carve wood and how to tell which plants are good for medicine. I can make coffee and tend horses, and those are useful skills, William Patterson said gently. But a young lady needs more. She needs to learn to read music, to speak French, to conduct herself in society. She needs opportunities that, he glanced around the sparse homestead, that this place simply cannot provide. Jake knew the man was right. What could he offer a growing girl? A life of isolation, always looking over their shoulders for the next threat? The constant worry that his past would catch up with them both? He was a killer trying to learn how to be a father, and there were no guidebooks for such a transformation. But when he looked down at Lily, he saw something in her eyes that made his heart ache. Fear, not of him, but of losing him, of being taken away from the only home she'd known where someone loved her unconditionally. Can we talk? Jake said to the judge. Just us men. William Patterson nodded, and they walked a little distance from the cabin, leaving Clara to fuss over Lily like a hen with a long-lost chick. You seem like good people, Jake said when they were out of earshot. And I know you can give her things I can't. But has anyone asked what she wants? The judge frowned. She's 9 years old, Mr. Morrow. Children that age don't always know what's best for them. Maybe not, but they know where they feel safe, where they feel loved. Jake looked back at Lily, who was politely answering Clara's questions, but keeping her eyes fixed on him. I won't lie to you. I'm not a good man. I've done things that would turn your stomach. But that little girl has made me want to be better than I am. I can see that, William said quietly. But wanting to change and actually changing are different things. Can you honestly tell me you can leave your past behind completely? That men like those, he nodded toward the 3 crosses visible in the distance, won't keep coming for you? Is that the life you want for her? The question hit Jake like a physical blow because it was the same one he'd been asking himself every night for 6 months. How long before someone else came hunting him? How long before Lily had to watch him kill again? Or worse, watch him die? If I let her go with you, Jake said slowly, would you let me write to her? Let her know she's not forgotten. Judge Patterson considered this. I think that could be arranged. If you truly care about her welfare. Jake walked back to where Lily waited, his heart feeling like it was made of lead. She ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist, and he had to close his eyes against the pain of what he was about to do. Lily, he said, kneeling down to her level. These folks want to give you opportunities one can't. A real education, a chance at a different kind of life. I don't want a different life, she said fiercely. I want this life. I want you. I know, honey. I want you too. More than anything in this world. But sometimes loving someone means letting them have the chances they deserve, even when it hurts. Tears were running down her face now, and Jake felt his own eyes burning. You're sending me away. I'm giving you a choice, he said. If you want to stay here with me, I'll fight for you. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. But if you think you might want to try something new, something that could give you the whole world instead of just one corner of it, then I'll understand. Lily was quiet for a long time, her small face serious as she thought. Finally, she looked up at him with those winter sky eyes that were so much like his own. If I go, she said, will you come see me? Will you still be my papa? Jake's throat was so tight he could barely speak. Always. Distance doesn't change that. Time doesn't change that. You'll always be my daughter, no matter where you are or how far apart we might be. She looked over at the Pattersons, then back at him. They seem nice, and I don't want to learn to read better. Maybe learn music like Mama used to play. Then you should go with them. The next hour was the hardest of Jake's life. He helped Lily pack her few belongings, the torn letter from her mother, a wooden horse he'd carved for her during the winter, the blue dress that had brought her to his door. Clara Patterson wept openly, saying over and over how happy they would make her, how she would want for nothing. Judge Patterson shook Jake's hand before mounting his horse. "We're doing the right thing," he said. "It takes courage to put someone else's needs before your own." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice. He watched as they helped Lily onto the spare horse they'd brought for her, watched as she settled into the saddle with the grace that came from months of riding with him around the homestead. Before they rode away, Lily looked back at him one last time. "Two knocks," she called out. "If you ever need me, just knock twice, and I'll come running." And then they were gone, disappearing into the morning light that painted the grasslands gold and green. Jake stood there until he couldn't see them anymore, until there was nothing left but the sound of wind through the grass and the memory of a little girl's laughter echoing in the silence. He went back inside the cabin, and the emptiness hit him like a wall. Everything reminded him of her: the curtains she'd hung, the flowers she'd planted, the rocking chair where she'd sat while he told her stories of her mother. But along with the grief came something else, a kind of peace he'd never known before. For the first time in his adult life, he'd chosen love over selfishness. He'd put someone else's future ahead of his own desires. It hurt worse than any bullet he'd ever taken, but it was a clean hurt, honest and pure. Jake walked to the window and looked out at the 3 crosses marking the graves of the men who tried to take everything from him. Then he looked toward the horizon where Lily had disappeared, riding toward a future full of possibilities he could never have given her. Perhaps redemption wasn't about washing away the past, but about choosing differently when the future arrived at your door with small knuckles and winter sky eyes, asking for nothing more than love and giving back everything you never knew you needed.